It's just everybody just show love. They care about me. Some of the players I enjoy playing against this year is Dylan Swain, Cortez Freeman, the two guards from West, and Trey Perry. And I said that because they're high competitive players and they give me a matchup.
I really do feel in the City League we have some of the best coaches. Me being a City League alum myself, I get to relive those moments every day from practice to games, and I'm very proud to be a head coach in the Columbus City League.
I shout out George Harold, Ajon Francis, and Lamarion, because dude just like older brothers to me on the court.
A lot of his success is credit to his teammates, but it's also a credit to his leadership. They're all like brothers, and they all want to see him succeed as well.
Some things I appreciate about Coach Chuck is just how he is on and off the court. Like on the court, he tells us it's the difference between liking a game and loving the game. Don't be a part-time basketball player. Then off the court, he's a really big role model because he's just not a coach to me, he's a dad. Just someone I can call on.
Dominique Akins is a special kid, kind of know his family off the court, and the relationship me and him have is bigger than basketball. We talk about a lot of things outside of basketball, and just to see him involved in these last 2 years and what he's doing this year just goes to the testament of the type of kid he is. Very hard-nosed, and he's very special to this program, especially after losing to Mr. Basketball and team that's won a city and district championship. And Walnut Ridge has always had the next guy ready to step up, and for him to be doing what he's doing in his junior year makes me feel proud to say that Walnut Ridge is in good hands.
I say I want to start engineering just because that's just something I've just been looking forward to since I was a young kid. And that's what my brother went to college for, so he just inspired me to do that. When college coaches come see me, they see that I can score the ball well, I can pass it, play defense, I got a good attitude.
College coaches should recruit Dominique Akins because some of the things he's able to do and escape out of trouble, you can't teach that. What he's doing this season, averaging over 29 points in his junior year, seeing double teams being physical with him, I think he has all the tools to be successful at the next level. I know a lot of coaches probably spend a lot of time preparing for him, and the biggest jump from his sophomore year to junior year is he's able to adjust to that. So I think college coaches will just leave Walnut Ridge after watching Dominique play and just see the ultimate competitor he is on both ends of the floor. You know, he's doing big things now in his junior year, so I can only imagine what's going to take place in his senior year. I think he will be ready to, once he touches the floor freshman year, to make an immediate impact to whatever university is lucky to have him.
Welcome back.
Our story begins in the 1950s. That's when a boy on an Italian vacation with his family brought home as many as 10 common European wall lizards to his home in Cincinnati, Ohio. He released them into his backyard, and over the years, the population in the Cincinnati area exploded. The lizards have now made their way to Columbus, specifically Columbus Downtown High School's parking lot. The issue here? As an invasive species, they could disrupt the ecosystem in Ohio and could have a negative impact on native wildlife. With that happening outside, students inside the school jumped at the opportunity to catch and study these lizards, working with Ohio Wesleyan University, the Ohio State University, and the Ohio Division of Wildlife. Mr. Hitoski's junior and senior environmental science classes are taking on the project. They were trained by OSU's Greg Lips and OWU's Eric Gangloff to master capturing techniques and handling practices.
This is a unique opportunity. Very rarely do we catch an invasive species before it spreads far out. You know, once it spreads throughout the city of Columbus, we won't be able to do anything about it. But here it's just in one little location. So it gives us an opportunity to try to capture them all and keep them from spreading throughout Columbus and further. And what we've done is we've removed all the vegetation from around the parking lot. And the lizards were very hard to capture when there was all that vegetation. They could hide down in it. So now it's barren. But we've given them ceramic tiles, laid those out all over through here to give some artificial cover, a place for the lizards to hide, and that's actually what they like. They like rock more than they like vegetation to hide in. So we're gonna keep doing this and keep checking over and over again until we're certain that we don't have any lizards remaining here. And if we accomplish that, it'll be one of the very few examples we have of successfully eradicating an invasive species before it takes hold.
I ain't gonna lie, I was like, you know, lizards, you know, they're part of the way, but then I, you know, discovered there was like rare lizards. I was like, oh, okay, this might be something that we may be able to do, just to learn, you know, more about lizards in general.
And as you're walking along, sort of thinking like a lizard, looking at any places where like the sun comes through and makes a nice like bright spot, or even in some of the leaf litter here, would be a good spot for them to go if they weren't necessarily, if the tiles weren't warm enough yet, or if they just hadn't chosen to go under one.
Quickly into their first search, lizards were spotted in their preferred habitat, cracks in the walls.
Dude, where? You're lying. Oh, look at it from where?
Oh, did you get one?
Right there. Oh, look, this one. But it's, I'm just telling you.
They of course love the crevices between the bricks or any cracks in any walls or foundation. It gives them a nice tight space to feel comfortable, to stay warm, to avoid elements or predators. The more of those places that we can remove on these sites, not only put the lizards a bit more out in the open where we can catch them and move them, but take away places where they could hibernate and overwinter and continue to be successful here.
But that wasn't the only place they were spotted. Researchers found more in the leaf litter along the fence.
When we do catch them, we put them in socks. Like they have air, they don't die. And it's just more comfortable for them so they're not suffocating or anything or squished.
I told you. That was good. That makes the dream work.
That was a good plan.
That was a good play.
But it was interesting. He knew where his hole was.
He knew exactly where he was going.
Yeah.
Oh, that one's pretty too.
It's another male. Like, they got like little checkers almost.
Yeah, they got a nice design.
Don't they? I know, they're really pretty.
It's really alive.
Yeah, he's really alive. Look.
Can I hold it?
No, I don't want to let it go of him, but
Jump.
put your finger out and watch. And watch. You can get to feel his claws here. Watch. Feel the claws on his toes. Can you feel that? You can just see a heartbeat inside there. There it is. See the little heartbeat?
Yeah.
Doom, 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 doom. Yep. one of the approved methods
Why is
for.
breathing different when he's on his back?
Oh, I think he's stressed. He's probably very stressed out, so he's breathing. Did you want to see him?
I don't be seeing
gonna run away?
No, I'm not gonna let you hold him. I'll do this, and you can feel his feet grab onto you. I'm gonna hold on to him.
Okay.
Do they jump?
Yes. They jump and they run. All right. Cool. Well, it's been great to have the students involved. It's always fun for them to get to see what's living around them and also expose them to research. Not many high school students get to see that kind of work, so it's been a lot of fun.
It's a nice spot.
Oh yeah, he's pretty. And so, will they bite?
We'll find out. No.
No, it's freaking out.
Oh, you can really see the blues down there. See him on his belly?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to call our Finance and Appropriation meeting to order on today, October 11th. Chair Cole will be joining us. He is just running late this afternoon. Please call the roll.
President Adair.
Present.
Board Member Brown. Chair Cole. Mr. Green. Ms. Johnson. Mr. Jordan. Mr. Miller.
Here.
At this point, we do not have.
Right, we do not have quorum, so when Mr. Cole gets here, we will. So we're going to go ahead and skip item 2, which is the approval of the minutes, and we will go ahead and go to item 3, which is our quarterly finance report. So I'll turn it over to you, Treasurer Vanover.
And there we go. All right, so normally on this, in this report, I would be providing the monthly report for September and then also the quarterly report for the first quarter. If you recall, we moved last month's meeting up because we were out of town at a conference, so we didn't actually have an August report because we hadn't closed the books at that point. So rather than doing an August monthly report and a September monthly report and then doing a quarterly report, which includes August and September, the monthly reports are actually included in the backup on the agenda. But the presentation that I'm going to do tonight is strictly the quarterly report so that we're not being redundant and making good use of our time. And this is just a reminder of the layout of the monthly reports that are attached as well as the quarterly report where there's an executive summary and then we gradually get more detailed into each of those groups and line items. So one thing to note, this report is still being compared to the plan, which is based on the May 5-year forecast. So once we do get the board to adopt the November 5-year forecast, a lot of the variances that we'll be going through will be essentially remedied because we will have made adjustments for the assumptions that we know now have changed. So just keep that in mind as we go through here. So as you can see right off the top, the revenues for the quarter are above plan by just under 10 million or 2.5 or 2.4%. Expenditures are below plan by just under 14 million or almost 7%, giving our cash balance an increase of 33.7 million or just under 8%. When we look at our total revenues for the quarter and the year to date, which obviously in this particular scenario is the same, the primary drivers here, general property tax, we did receive our August settlement. We received a little bit higher than expected at about 9.5 million. State aid is over by about 10.2 million compared to plan. Keeping in mind that does not include removing the amount for the transportation penalties. So some of that additional revenue is a function of the fact that that estimated cost is not reflected. And this does reflect the increases related to the updated cost inputs as well as the continued phase-in. We did get the updated October #1 payment, and we're able to compare that, and we've made some adjustments. but the adjustments from what we had received in the other ones and our simulations to the actual October payments were not very drastic, so it's not changing any of this at this point. Other financing resources was over $6.2 million. This is primarily tied up in the advances and the transfers that came in a little bit higher at the end of the fiscal year. And then the state portion of local taxes, previously called property tax allocation or homestead and rollback, is under mainly because we didn't get the payment yet. It was due to come in at the end of September. It's actually come in the beginning of October. So it's just a timing issue. So as we look through some of the more details, again, we talked through the property taxes and the state aid. If you look at the restricted federal grants, that is, again, a timing issue. That's the the qualified school construction bonds, or what we call Q-Scoobies. That was the subsidy for that we should have received last fiscal year. It was actually received this quarter. So we should this year actually see 2 subsidy payments coming through. Again, the state share of local property tax, the property tax allocation should have been received in September. It was due to be received this week. Other financing sources, again, is related to your fiscal year end transfers for ESSER and other grants that came in a little higher than expected. When you get into the other revenues, most of these, again, are the types of things that I was mentioning before, where as we move forward and with updated assumptions in the November forecast, a lot of these adjustments will be right-sized, for lack of a better way of wording it. For example, investment or interest on investments, we have worked with our investment advisors and come up and evaluated the portfolio and have a much more accurate estimate versus using past trends, which is what we had in there prior. So those numbers will be reflected on there, so you can see that the actual is significantly higher, and that's the reason behind that. Same thing with pilots. This is going to be greatly reduced. We knew when House Bill 126 went through, there was going to be an influx of payments to try to get all those agreements settled and closed out, so to speak. So we have confirmed with our with Rich and Gillis, our type of attorneys, but they have confirmed that the amount that we are still due of all of those agreements is very small. So not knowing one way or the other, again, since it was in the forecast in May, it's still in there now, but as we move to November, we have reduced that assumption down to reflect what we know to be the case. Okay, so total expenditures, big driver here, as you can imagine, is personnel. This is primarily due to plan design. We set it up in such a way that we take the number of pays, we spread them out, we account for the 3 pay months. But I think we all understand that January and August are typically your, it's the tail end of last year's contracts. Your 21 pay people are not included on this, so it's anticipated that those 2 months are going to be under plan as we, for one, get the 21 pay staff back on the books as well as getting new people hired. So it's just a plan design adjustment that's being made there. Again, as we go through here, this also, the personnel is also assuming 100% staffing, which we all know in July is not the case. So this first quarter estimate is always typically a little bit lower just because of those dynamics. On the non-personnel side of things, the primary, if you notice, there's some larger than normal variances on purchase services and capital outlay. Those are all related to carryover encumbrances. So again, timing of when invoices were received and paid. So had those been received prior to June 30th, we would be more in line. And again, other financing uses is different. Again, it's a plan design thing. We lay it out across the month. These are typically those advances and transfers that are done primarily at the end of the fiscal year. So again, it's just an adjustment in how the plan is designed. This is just a monthly graph that shows, again, they kind of lay out the month of the salary, so you can see the peaks are the 3 pay months. And you'll notice in the gray lines, which is last year, those dips in January is when we account for Wellness Week. So those are just those phenomenons, but this just kind of shows the trend that we expect to follow on our payrolls. And this is just a recap. So are there any questions, comments?
Any questions?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to go into the next one, which is item 4, involving the fiscal year budget request from Student Leadership Engagement. Not sure who I'm trying.
Yes.
That's
Over to Terry.
Thank you, President Adair. Good afternoon, committee members. Today I'd like to present to you a request for a transfer. And this transfer, as President Adair alluded to, is transferring the appropriation from our engagement department to our transformation and leadership department. You may wonder or ask yourself as to why or how this is coming before FAC. Per board policy 6231, any transfers over $50,000 require board approval. So this will be added to, or it's already on next week's agenda to be approved by the board for a request to move $80,725 from the engagement department to the transformation and leadership department. And the reason for this transfer is because our student ambassador program was under one department and it's now switching to another. And this formality per board policy is to move the corresponding budget. So this item will be shown up next week's board agenda. This is a pro forma action for this committee, meaning there's no action required. It's more informational, just so we're aware of what's happening in our budget world. So this time it was a short and sweet presentation here, but we'll be glad to answer any questions if needed.
Do you have anything to add, Dr. Chapman?
Sure. I'll just share that, as I am looking at our organization structure, certainly thinking about where we want to maximize the support of various team members. This strategy is really about student leadership, more than just student engagement, but student leadership and empowering our students, amplifying their voices. They're working, Mia Pruitt is working directly with schools, and so it makes sense for us for that work to be more aligned with the leadership development work and the support with our schools instead of the support and the work in our engagement team. So we've made that shift internally, and then we're also making sure that we make sure that the goals and the work of our student ambassador team is aligned to our Portrait of a Graduate work and has a clear focus on student leadership opportunities. So right before I came over here this afternoon, our superintendent student ambassadors were meeting at Columbus Downtown High School, and the topic when I walked in was about student leadership. Each of the superintendent student ambassadors are going to identify a problem of practice in their school or community, and they're going to research it. When I left Columbus Downtown High School, they were talking about quantitative and qualitative research. I said, students, listen, I didn't get quantitative and qualitative research until I worked on my dissertation. This is fancy. So we are very excited about the work. I'm sure that's more than what you wanted to hear about this particular logistical financial transfer, but just want you all to know that we are thinking very intentionally, very strategically about how we organize the work and making sure that it is aligned to our goals, our guardrails, as well as our aspirations for where we want our students to be.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. I think it's always important to, make sure that we understand the finances, but also the why behind the finances.
Absolutely.
So that was exactly perfect. So are there any questions? Okay. All right, so we will go ahead and move into item 5, which is economic development incentives. We have a discussion on economic development incentives. I'll turn it back over to Treasurer Vanover.
Okay. This one I am going to introduce and turn over this presentation. This is Jeremy Buskirk. He works with Baker Tilly, and they have graciously worked with us to compile not only just a high-level overview of all the various types of tax incentive programs that are available, but also kind of dig into specifically those that exist in Columbus City Schools and kind of help dive into that data so that we have a better understanding of its breakdown and what it represents. So I'm going to turn that over to Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and that is exciting to hear about the students and what they're learning. That is neat to see the leadership that is occurring for the next generation. President Adair and committee members, it's an honor to be able to be here tonight and just go over a quick overview of different tax incentives. The goal tonight is to look over, again, an overview of the purpose behind tax incentives, to look at how the district can be involved, and as Treasurer Vanover said, we'll pull out some of those specific types and how they are applying to Columbus City Schools. So with the purpose of, you may be asked or ask yourself, why do tax incentive programs exist? And ultimately the goal of the tax incentive programs, as many things within government, they are set up by the Ohio law to provide opportunities to work with businesses, to help stimulate growth, to provide opportunities within the community, and just drawing some attention to it's for the public interest is the overall goal. That could be a public interest of promoting an investment in actual business. It could be looking at ways to provide affordable housing, preserving and creating jobs, and but ultimately it goes back to how can there be a public interest and enhance the community. So with these incentives, the encouragement is for a collaboration between the local governments and business, but do want to highlight that they're not meant to be forever. The law does provide that they are temporary and that there are limits put in place, and we'll look at some of those. As you know, schools' primary source of funding are property taxes. That's an item, and a lot of times the incentive programs are abating and asking different groups, school districts, to forego those taxes. So there are ways that schools can be involved. Advanced notice is one thing that's specifically in the code, that a school, whether it's one that would have to come before a board or if it is one that does not, there still needs to be a notice to allow you to know that those incentives are coming. There are those opportunities where if they do come before you, that you can have a say in negotiating and or ultimately vetoing it if it is not something you think is appropriate. Then there's also, after the fact, you may have heard TIRC meetings, Tax Incentive Review Council. It's an annual meeting once those incentive programs are in place, where it gives the opportunity for a designee of the district to help review and make sure that those incentive programs are living up to what they had promised. So those are some of the ways that a school district can be involved. As we jump then into, we're going to talk about 4 different areas of tax incentives, starting off with the enterprise zones. Enterprise zones are looking at businesses, looking at commercial and industrial specifically, and the focus in these enterprise zones is to provide the opportunity for expansion in Ohio, to locating in Ohio. It also looks at distressed areas. You may say, what are distressed areas? And some of the areas that might be looked at as being a distressed area is if a specific designated part of a community maybe has unemployment below a certain state average. Has it had population loss over a period of time? Are there significant vacancies or demolishing of facilities? Or are income levels seen to be below a certain average or below the certain peer areas within that community. So those are some of the areas where the designation for being distressed might come about. For these, then the term and percentage, the maximum term is up to 100% and 15 years. And if it is a 75% abatement, so foregoing 75% of the taxes that would have been received in 10 years, it doesn't have to come before a school district. If you go above either that percentage or the term in years, there is that likelihood that you would see those come before the school district, and that's when there might be that opportunity to negotiate. As a requirement of that, though, because it is looking at stimulating and providing employment in those distressed areas, those, as part of that Turk meeting, the requirements of the employment levels and payroll are monitored. Going on to the next program, community reinvestment areas, and as Treasurer Vanover said, we pulled data specifically for Columbus schools from the Franklin County Auditor's incentive website. And by and large, the CRA areas, if you look at parcel by parcel, is where most of the incentive programs are for your school district. And this program, much like the EZs, they're looking at providing incentives to revitalize. Just as the program says, it's looking for reinvestment in certain areas within the community. And this one is looking at, you could also have residential CRA, so looking at the affordable housing piece, or commercial and industrial. As we look at, on some of the later slides, as we look at some of the specific items for Columbus City Schools, we talk about commercial and industrial, but a reminder that apartments, so affordable housing potentially in an apartment, or a retail condominium, also elderly housing, those can also fall within the commercial area. So when we talk commercial and industrial, it's not just industry, it's also those areas as well. But the term for these can be up to, it used to be, before April of 23, it was a 50% threshold of that abatement. And with some changes with Senate Bill 33, that did move up to 75% that did not then have to come before the board. So the max term is 100% in 15 years, much like the enterprise zones. Hiring, employment are also things that are monitored, but it's more expected hiring instead of those set goals. Just to highlight as well, you may hear from time to time with the CRAs that there are pre-94 and post-94. There were changes made effective July 1 of 1994. I'll let you look at that table, but the main change here gave extra flexibility in the term and in the percentage being an up to instead of a must be 100%. The final abatement, again, coming back to the abatement side, is a reduction in the taxes, and we'll contrast that when we talk about the next one after this of the tax increment financing. But abatements are the reduction of the taxes. So the last one here is the environmental protection abatement programs. If you look on Franklin County's auditor's website, you'll see that there are those as well. These are, as you would naturally think, going through the environmental protection. It's primarily those brownfield areas, places that have been shown to be polluted, and there might be environmental hazards, and an abatement is given for those areas. By statute, that is up to 100% in 10 years, and these would not be ones that go through the Turk program. These are solely oversight by the Ohio EPA and administered through the Franklin County Auditor. So as I said, the next program, you probably hear a lot about TIFs. These are a often used program, and this then, instead of the reduction or exemption of those taxes, these are taxes that, again, are forgone by local governments, but these are diverted to a TIF fund, and the fund then is used to help with public infrastructure, getting sites ready to go for investment and for business industry to come in there. So it is a public infrastructure financing tool that is benefiting private development, and in general, there's limited use with residential. It's usually on the commercial side. Two areas where these would not come before the school district is if it is what you would call a straight 75% abatement or exemption, and a 10-year term. The other one where it could be a higher amount, a higher percentage, and a higher term is if it is a non-school TIF, and those non-school TIFs can go up to the 30 years, and it's the non-school TIF is if you're being made whole. So getting the amount of taxes that you would have got if the TIF was not in place. There could be some that would come before, if it's not a non-school TIF, that if it goes beyond that 10-year and 75% amount that would be required to come before the board. As noted earlier, the requirement here is that this is being used on infrastructure. And think of infrastructure as utilities, could be communication servicing, so your internet and getting things ready to go for investment. So we've talked a little bit about compensation agreements in general. A lot of times those will come before or will come to the school district as as a payment in lieu, but it doesn't have to be just that. It could be services. It could be a commitment to provide health care in your buildings. It could be internships or equipment. So it doesn't just have to be a pure payment of funds. So last thing before we get into the Columbus school specific areas is just looking at what are those potential roles that a board would take then. There could be those opportunities to establish, whether it be a formal or an informal policy, really just getting everybody, administration, board, on the same page of when something comes before the board, how are we going to treat it? How are we going to look at it? It is one of those things because the whole goal is hopefully that it's a collaborative effort, that these are coming before the board. You're hearing about the different incentives that may occur prior to because of the relationships that you have with your, your city or the county. But there is that ability to maintain flexibility to be able to look at, is this something that is deemed good for the community and good for the schools, and being able to provide those case-by-case situations. Again, though, ultimately, hopefully, you're able to work as a partnership with the local government and promote a responsible development program that benefits the schools and your community as a whole. So looking at some of the specific Columbus City schools, just high level, I mentioned the Turk. At the Turk, it was noted that there were 75 agreements for CRAs and EZs that were either in an active pending or a new status for calendar year 23. Thinking about that, though, working with the administration, only 4 of those CRAs or EZs have come before the board during the last 10 years. Meaning that a lot of these ones that are in place are long-standing, So they could be some of those pre-94 easy or CRAs that would, you're able to put things into those programs and it wouldn't come back before the board. Or they're falling in some of those areas over the years that haven't had to come before the board. As we looked through those different programs, the exemption percentage, as we've talked about, ranged from 50% to 100%. And I'll note that that's the max amount. We'll see on one of the slides when we look at a graph that those individuals generally are still paying some taxes, so it's not like they're not paying any taxes at all, but that improvements or new construction on those properties are receiving the abatement or exemption. Term then, again, 6 to 15 years, some of them going up to that maximum amount. The tax increment financing that we talked about, this is something that is actually a good thing for your schools. Not every community that we see can say that all but one of your TIF arrangements are the non-school or being made whole. So you guys are receiving around just a little under $93 million of payments to make whole for those TIFs that are outstanding. So that's a good thing for you, that not every community can say that they've been able to have that type of arrangement for a TIF. As we get into some of the specifics then, just to kind of give you an idea, when we extrapolated that data and tried to look through, as I said earlier, tried to put into perspective, is it housing or is it non-housing? And that housing being not only residential properties, looking at the land use code, but also looking at those areas that might be zoned commercial, but really are providing housing within your school district. When we look at a parcel by parcel area, it's heavily on the residential side. And as we then look at the actual abated taxes as reported by Franklin County, you'll see that, again, the abated portion of the taxes are still, the majority are in the housing area, with non-housing being just a little under 50%. As I noted, though, just because it's being abated doesn't mean that taxes aren't being paid. And again, the other area where you'll see on that table just below that there is a slightly higher abatement percentage in general and on average with all of those properties in the housing area. So looking at trying to provide that affordable housing. So as we think about that amount of taxes that are currently being abated, the next two graphs are going to look strangely familiar and similar, but wanted to give you two different perspectives. One on the tax dollars that are being abated by both of those areas, the housing and the non-housing. And then looking how those trend down or fall off with the current snapshot of what abatements are available. And do want to clarify, what we're looking at on these last couple charts are those EZs, EPAs, and the CRAs, because the TIFs, again, you're being made whole with those. So as we look through that, you'll see over the first 10 years, on average about 2 to 4 million drops off year over year through that first 10 years, and then has a little steeper decline over those last 5 years of the 15-year period that we're looking at. With that, that's about 3 to 5% of those that are outstanding that drop off. So looking at that percentage, that 3 to 5% in the last one, again, you'll see this very similar trend lines, but now looking at a percentage basis where it drops down year over year, again, in about that 3 to 5% year over year, until it makes to that 10-year mark where some of your long-standing, longer ones drop off. So ultimately, as we started off saying, the goal with incentive programs are to have that collaboration and help to provide a responsible and good development within your schools. But appreciate the opportunity to just kind of take that look through the programs that are within Columbus City Schools.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you. On the estimated dollar amount that is being abated, both housing and non-housing, that's about $60 million that's being abated today. In other words, if they weren't abatements, that would be additional revenue that we would have.
That is correct.
And when the chart, this is abatements that are up until what point? I think is it September?
Which
both of these charts.
Oh,
so
both of those last two charts. So,
yeah.
so what this is showing is anything. It took the current snapshot of what was outstanding, what was being reported as of September 22. Correct. But most of those tax payments have come in, or abatements have been for the calendar year have been received in those tax payments. So what this is showing then after 23, what's still outstanding. So you will notice on the percentage one that it is below that 100%, and that's because what's still outstanding as of the end of 23, moving into 24, is that piece there. Does that answer your question?
Kind of. So I just know that this week we got notices of 3 new abatements, and I just am wondering if those are reflected in your chart. They're dated for October.
Not knowing the exact abatements, if they are some of those that are still pending or new and haven't rolled onto the rolls yet, no, they wouldn't be included. I do know with the data, there are some that are noted as pending, but likely those ones, if you've just been notified that they're coming, they wouldn't be included.
I was just wondering if who monitors the abatement and keep the developer in check to make sure that they're doing what they said they were going to do as far as job promises or whatever they promised. How does that work?
So that's part of the Turk meeting process, but those reports also go to the Ohio Department of Development. But ultimately, the oversight comes through that Turk meeting where they're monitoring what has been reported and assuring that if those are hit, I mean, there are those opportunities if they're not hitting their goals, that Turk group could rescind and not approve.
Has that ever happened?
I believe it has, yes.
So prior to me coming with Baker Tilly, I also attended those. And yes, there were a couple times that I know that they were rescinded.
Yeah, I attended the Turk in August, and they asked a lot of questions when there were some corporations and some, not all of them were within Columbus because it was entire county, but there were a lot of questions stemming from, well, they said they were going to provide these many jobs and this much in infrastructure, and if they didn't meet it, they were making recommendations to take action going forward. Now they had progressive steps, so some it was their first time not meeting, but some it was their second or third time, and they were talking through whether or not to rescind. So yes, they did go through all of that.
And is that the same process too for the CRA, for the CRAs?
Both the CRAs and EZs are monitored through that Turk process.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions?
So can I just restate something back to you? So right now, as in this report, there were 75 active abatements. So pending, active, or new, that are the CRAs or the EZs. In the last 10 years, only 4 of them have been required to get board approval. And so they range from 50 to 100% in abatement, but that doesn't mean 100% doesn't necessarily mean 100%. It just means 100% of the new or the, what do you call it? Improvement. Thank you. Improvement. And the terms range between 6 to 15 years. And then the total You just said, Jordan said, over 60 million a year on average is what is being abated. And Jenny, can you remind us what one payroll is?
Around 25, 30 million.
25, 30 million for one payroll.
That was an excellent summary. Yes.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. If there aren't any additional questions, we have a 5-year forecast. We can move on to that.
Do we want to essentially establish the quorum and vote on the minutes as
Let's
well?
please do that. Forgive me.
No worries. Chair Cole, are you here?
Present.
Okay. So yeah, 2.01 is simply the approval of the minutes where they're.
So moved.
All right. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Moving right along. All right, so now we have, why is there not? Okay, so moving right into the 5-year forecast presentation. Again, the one thing I want to point out, suddenly things got very strong. We did obviously complete a fiscal year, so the last forecast that was presented and approved was for through May of 23, so fiscal year 23 was not an actual. As such, we've closed the books. There was a small increase in balance, around 3.8% or 8.9 million, that helped improve our cash balance based on how we finished out the year. And I want to note that I'm going to go through a couple levels of assumptions. This first group of assumptions for both revenues and expenditures apply regardless of the levy outcome. So this is in all cases, all scenarios. So these I'm going to go through individually, and then we'll get into the individual options for the levy scenarios. So major assumption on the revenues, again, we've talked about this quite a bit, but the state funding formula was approved. It was approved with a continuation of the phase-in. So in 24, that puts us at 50%. 25 puts us at just under 67%. And it updated the cost inputs from FY20 or FY18 data to FY22 data. So that helped us, provided a little over $20 million in each year. The downside, we also, in House Bill 33, they basically put into statute the transportation noncompliance penalty. So we do, based on historical numbers, have 15 million in a noncompliance penalty included. So fortunately, that takes a good chunk of what we're going to receive in additional state funding through the formula updates, and essentially takes it through the noncompliance penalty. Again, as I mentioned before, the pilot payments have been removed because, again, we've consulted with Rich and Gillis to confirm that majority of what we were supposed to receive that was accelerated by House Bill 126 has been paid. So rather than maintaining that going forward, it's not going to be received because we've essentially received the majority of that. On the expenditure side of things, as we've stated before, personnel, 4% base increases that were all negotiated through 25. And for the final 3 years of the forecast, we have a 2.5% base increase forecasted. The reduced staffing plan positions for FY25 and 26 are still maintained. And on the non-personnel side of things, the reductions that Dr. Chapman's team identified at the end of last year that were then implemented at the beginning of this year are in place and maintained throughout. So again, these are the assumptions that are essentially in both scenarios that we will go through here shortly. As we all know, we have a ballot request on November 7th, issue number 11. It would generate 38.6 million in operating levy or operating funds through the 3 mills, and for permanent improvement funds, 68.5 million, and which is generated from the 4.7 mil request. So again, going through the levy approved option, again, this is assuming we received both of those options. One thing I do want to note, which I'm guessing most of you all know, but just to clarify and call it out, the PI funds are not reflected in the forecast, but it is obviously still a portion, and it does have an impact to the forecast assumptions that are included. So again, going back through the revenue assumptions, aside from what I've already mentioned, based on the action that the board took on the 19th, all of these assumptions are based on that action. So, but the only revenue assumption that changes is in the event that it passes, we get $38.6 million more a year. This is the equivalent to about 6.5% of our current property tax revenue, just to provide some context on that. And again, understanding that in the event that it would pass, we would get a half a year's collection this year, full year collection beginning next year. On the expenditure side of things, again, this is all directly connected to the statement of facts that was board approved on September 19th. 294 positions currently funded through the ESSER program would be brought over to the general fund. And we would also be looking to expand the pre-K programming at 6 sites, which isn't the equivalent of 18 staffing positions. I can go through the specifics, but again, these are have all been outlined and provided through the statement of facts. Expenditure assumptions, again, on the levy passage option, because of the fact that in the event of levy passage, we would have a dedicated resource in the permanent improvement fund. The $20 million transfer for capital needs would be removed. And again, tying back to the ESSER programs and services that have been provided previously through this federal funding source, we've quantified that 8.8 million of that is in purchase services, 9.3 is in supplies, and that is again then modeled throughout the forecast. Again, I can go through some of these, but it's all of the information that has been provided and was board approved on the 19th. So, in this graph, the blue bars represent the revenues, the red bars represent the expenditures, the line represents the cash balance. So you can see that in 24 and 25, our revenues are exceeding our expenditures. We do begin deficit spending in 26, which is the reason for the decline in the cash balance. So, and again, this is just cash balance, so this is not 60 days cash balance. We'll get to that in a future slide. But I think what this points out is that even with levy passage and the implementation of these additional resources, we would still have to continue to look at our resources and try to find ways to be more efficient, save money, those types of things, so that we do not continue to deficit spend any more than we have to. Okay, so here is cash balance. This is showing both ending cash and 60 days reserve cash. Again, 60 days reserve cash is a best practice. We strive for that. It's not always achievable, but you can see here that with these assumptions, we have a positive ending cash balance in 28. We do not have a positive 60 days cash balance in 28. So again, some things to be done if we want to try to maintain that best practice going forward. Okay, so that is levy passes option. In the event that the levy is rejected, we have another one. So on the revenue assumptions, there is no change. There's no additional revenue, and everything is already modeled based on current information. On the expenditure assumptions, quite a different picture. None of the positions from ESSER, including the ones that were identified as critical and important to the programming by the superintendent and her team, none of those come over, in addition to no expansion on the pre-K. So, again, this is just showing the impact based on the statement of facts that was approved back on the 19th. On the non-personnel side, in the event that it doesn't pass, and we do not have that dedicated resource to fund our capital needs, the $20 million capital transfer does remain in place. Other than that, there are no additional. We maintain the reduced non-personnel staffing, or the new reduced non-personnel budgets, and maintain all of that through the remainder of the forecast. Similar picture, the difference being, again, we still begin to deficit spend in 26. It's just a bigger disparity because we have less revenue to help offset the deficit spending that we are dealing with. So if you notice, by 2028, we're about zero. We're about even. So not as positive as obviously we would prefer to be, but that's where we are with those assumptions. When we get into cash balance versus the 60 days cash balance, again, you can see that in 28 we're barely above zero. On 28, and we're clearly not above zero with regards to the 60 days cash balance, but we're also not at 60 days cash balance in 27. So again, this is another scenario where we have to continue to review and implement additional reductions to try to figure out how to reduce that deficit spending that's modeled here in these current assumptions. This graph here just shows a comparison of both. So the lines in blue are the levy passage. The dotted lines represent the 60 days cash balance. The lines in red are the failing options. So this is, I mean, it's all, everything just moves up when the money's there. It's pretty straightforward. But again, this just kind of helps show a quick side-by-side comparison of the two options. So that is the overview of what we have in the forecast. Are there questions, comments, thoughts?
Questions, anyone? Yes.
Yeah,
Madam President.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just wondering when if the doesn't pass, when would those ESSER funds, I mean, those teachers have to be, how long can we keep, how long will we hold on to those positions that we have from the ESSER funds?
They're funded through this school, the end of this school year. So
Through the end
it
of
would,
the school year,
all of
would be
these
fine.
reductions and all of these changes would take effect at the start of FY25.
So the red bars are the failure. If you go back to the levy outcome comparison chart, and kind of going off what Jordan was saying, we only get to these red bars because we have to make cuts and we are not implementing programs or keeping positions. So even to stay in, with positive cash balance, it means we have to cut. So just to be clear, when looking at that, the cuts and more cuts will be necessary to keep us above zero.
Yes, absolutely.
And Dr. Chapman, can you remind us what the impact of those cuts are as we see the red bars on the financial picture here? What were those cuts again from our factual presentation?
So going back to our presentation, there will be significant cuts to positions as well as programs. So some of the positions that we highlighted were all of the ESSER positions. I believe there were 647.
Correct, yeah. They don't all come back in the past option, but yes, 647 is what was identified.
So all of our ESSER positions, many of our social emotional learning supports, and programming. So we know that we're going to have to scale back our programming, particularly when we're thinking about our summer program, when we're thinking about currently it's our K through 12 online program. That will be a secondary program only. We'll have to scale back significantly with our technology investments and our one-to-one program that we have to provide all students with the technology that they need to address the digital divide. There are, our hope certainly is to expand early childhood programming and offer more pre-K programming to students and families across the city. We would like to add 6 sites across the city, but certainly if the ballot initiative is not successful, we will not be able to do that. So there are several positions throughout the district. Certainly, as ESSER rolls off, we are revisiting and reviewing which positions we maintain if the ballot initiative is successful and which positions will be reduced or removed. So there'll be significant impacts to staffing as well as programming. Some programming will be eliminated, and so some programming will be scaled back significantly.
What is the impact to student outcomes?
So I would say that when we think about I'll take, for example, the mental health supports. We know that post-pandemic, our students have more needs in terms of mental health supports. The CDC did a report recently and shared data with us across the country about the impact that the pandemic had on our students and the rise and increase in suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression, feelings of loneliness and isolation. Our middle school and high school students, our teenagers, are even more
Susceptible.
are even more susceptible now than ever before. And we know as educators and as parents that if we do not have the resources and the tools to address the mental health needs of our students, that poses as a significant a barrier to academics. They won't be engaged. They won't come to school. They won't be motivated. They won't want to stay on track with their peers, to matriculate with their peers and earn their credits to be ready to graduate on time. And so it has a direct impact on the services that we provide our students so we can mitigate those non-academic barriers that certainly have a direct impact on student engagement, as well as our students' ability to have access to the curriculum and stay engaged. And then it's services, direct services to students. Last year, our summer program, our summer experience, we provided summer programming to over 9,000 students across the city. Pre-pandemic, prior to receiving ESSER funds, we were not able as a district to make that type of significant investment in summer programming. So we essentially extended the school year and added more days to the calendar for over 9,000 students. And those are opportunities that are really vital to the success of our students. Again, post-pandemic, we talk about the learning gaps and making sure that we're providing our students with support so that they can rebound from the pandemic, rebound from the disruptions that they've experienced. Well, that means we need to provide programming to make that happen. It does not happen through osmosis. It happens through intentional planning and intentional investments, and it is a significant challenge that we face.
Back over to the treasurer. So in both models, whether it passes or fails, you're showing in 2026 deficit spending.
Correct.
And you mentioned that the district would still need to be, looking at finances and ensuring that we're figuring that out.
Correct.
Some of the things that we've already discussed are realignment of learning communities, as well as, just other options. And I should mention, even to get to this point, we've already done reductions. So if we, continue down that path of the realignment of learning communities, that's not forecasted here, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And
The only
so,
reductions modeled currently are the ones that are already in place or the ones that were identified through the statement of facts in September.
so the current ask, if the levy passes, regardless, we're going to go into deficit spend in 2026.
Right.
And so again, this is just this is a foundation so that we
Right.
can continue to look at our finances and continue to improve them so that we are not going into deficit spend.
Agreed. Yes, that is correct.
That was more of a statement, and you agreed. So,
I'm with you.
And I thank you for the clarification, specifically the idea where we're going to have to consider even more possible cuts in purchase services. We've already made a 16% cut in that space, and this is one of those unfortunate and impactful low-hanging fruit spaces where we would have to look at making additional cuts in that area. So thank you for that clarification. Are there any additional questions?
just really quick, there were 2 additional documents attached in the agenda.
That is just the actual formal template that is provided to the ODE.
Thank you.
That will be provided to the board as well when we vote on it in November. That's just that's all the fund numbers. This is higher level.
Yeah. So just so that when
Yes.
you look at them, so this is the
Correct.
the numbers behind the report that you just
Correct.
provided.
Absolutely.
And one is for if the levy passes, and one is if it fails.
Correct. Yes.
And irrespective of the outcome of November, we still by law, are in a position to have to constantly be considering 5-year forecasting, constant revision of this document.
Right.
and looking at where we need to maintain solvency and show that to the state, demonstrate that to the state.
And we continue to do what my predecessor did, which is actually model it out. We model it out 10 years.
That's correct.
So we only statutorily have to report and require approval through 5, but we are constantly looking out 5 and 10 years to make sure that we don't get taken by surprise.
Thank you very much for that.
One final question.
Yes, sir.
So if this levy does pass, when's the next time you think we'll be back to the table with the deficit spending?
Well, and a lot of that depends on what types of reductions and what types of impacts that we can implement. In the meantime, we also have 2 additional biennial budgets that are not factored in here because we have absolutely no idea what those budgets will provide. So there are options available there that could be beneficial, they could be detrimental. We don't know until it happens. So we'll continue to look at, again, until we know more details and more specifics as the revenue goes, we've got to focus in on the expenditures and see where we can fine-tune those decisions and make those adjustments as necessary, and then see what happens on the revenue side. We're modeling no more than, or no less than 4. We always model at least 4 years out.
When you say biennial budget, you're talking about the state's budget.
Correct. Yes, because the biennial budget that was just passed only covers 24 and 25.
In addition to that, Mr. Miller, we still have to have rich conversation around facility master planning for the district. That may give us some measure of opportunity to turn over some stones and recover some dollars, but at the same time require us to look very seriously at what new building will entail. We want to be a 21st century school district for our children, and that is a vision that we have to take seriously under development.
And that's when I say realignment of learning communities, that's what I'm talking about. I just want to say I like the new format.
All right. All right. Are there any additional questions, comments? All right. Showing that there aren't any, is there a motion for adjournment? All right. If there aren't any nays, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you all for being here and walking us through this presentation today. This is going to be considerably helpful moving forward.